Hi everyone, in this lecture we are going to create the renderCounter function. Alright, so I'm going to come down here and I'm going to create a comment and I'm going to say renderCounter function. Let's go ahead and let's create the function, and the function is called renderCounter. What do we want to do inside this renderCounter? So to be on the same page, this is the counter. So now whenever we say renderCounter function, it is going to be responsible for this counter which is increasing, and for this bar, for this counter gauge or counter bar. Right? So what do I want to do? I want to first off implement an if statement, and the reason for that is I want to check for a condition. If that condition is true, I want to run a certain code, and that if that condition is not true or is false, I want to run a different condition, a different code. So what are the two conditions? The first condition is whenever this counter time is less than the question time. So the question time is 10. When the counter time is less than that, be that whatever. So either it is 0, 1, or all the way to 9. When it is less than that, what do I want to do? I want to increment it by 1. So if it is 0, I want to increment it by 1. If it is 1, increment it by 2, and so on and so forth. And as I increment this, I want to increment this with this background color, this purple color as well on this time gauge. So I want to increment the number, and I want to increment this segments that are coming here based on the time. So these are the two things that I want to do, and in the first condition, and if the condition is true. If the condition is not true, if the condition is false, I want to grab this counter and I want to make it 0. When is the condition false? The condition is false when the count and the question time are equal. Now you can see the count is 10 and the question time is 10. You can see that we go to the next question and the count starts from 0. Okay, now the next question, that is a whole different story. Here is where the question, now you can see here, it says 10 and the question time is 10. It means that the count and the question time, they are actually equal, and when it is equal, I wanna do something else. Okay, well actually this is not accurate. When they're equal, or let me put it this way: when the count is equal to the question time or less than that, I want to increment it, right? But when the count gets bigger, right? So when the count is 11, I just said when it is equal, I'm going to increment it, all right? And when I increment 10, it is going to be 11. And when it is 11, it is no more less than question time or equal to that. And then our condition is going to be false. When it is false, I want to reset the counter. So let's go ahead and let's just dive into code, because it is way easier whenever we just dive into code. So we have created our count right here. Maybe I should put it down here. We have created the count, and initially the value is going to be 0. So I'm going to say if count is less than or equal to the question time. We know what the question time is. The question time is 10. We have created it there. If the count is less than or equal to question time, it means that the count is 0 all the way to 9 and equal, which is 10. So in all the scenarios, we are going to grab our counter div from the HTML, and we are going to say dot inner HTML, and the inner HTML is going to grab the count into consideration. All right, so let's come here. We still don't see anything in here because we are not actually evaluating that. We are not running this renderCounter. So renderCounter function, let's run it. Check out it. Yes, we see 0. because the count has a default value of 0. If I set it to 500, we are going to see we're not going to see 500. Why is that? This is a cool thing that I just did. The reason that we do not see it is because 500 is neither less than nor equal to the question time, which is 10. That's why it did not run. So if I put it to 9 and save it, we are going to see 9. Even if I put it to 10, we are going to see it. That's why we say equal to or less than or equal to question time. If we just say less than, we are never going to see the count turn 10. Whenever we see equal, it is going to be 10, and then after that we are going to get our counter and make it 0. So now that everything is established, let's make it 0 once more. When the count, whatever the count is, we want to increment the time gauge by that amount. So let's grab our time gauge, and we are going to say .style.width. All right, it should be equal to the count times gauge unit, and we are going to add a pixel value to it. And after this is done, it means we are at the second of 0. When it is 0, what do I want to do? I want to increment it by 1, so it becomes 1. And when it is 1, then I want to increment it by 1, so it gets 2. Let's save it. Let's come here. Well, actually, we don't see it yet. And we get our count. If this condition is true, question. There is no timer, of course. There is no timer. And we should set a timer because we want this render counter. Now, this render counter, it runs only once. We don't want it to run once. We want it to run like forever, like run until the questions they are ended. So in the else block, I'm going to explain this if statement because I think it's a bit confusing. So in the else, we are just going to get our count and we're going to make it 0. So what does this if statement do? The if statement is going to grab the value of, so we know that inside this parentheses, we have our condition. We have gone over that. Excuse me. If the count is equal to or less than question time. So initially the count is going to be 0. 0 is less than question time. So this statement is true and this code is going to run. This code, so the count is 0. 0 is going to come here and we're going to see on the page 0. And then 0 is going to be inserted here. 0 times the gauge unit. What is the gauge unit? The gauge unit is the length of the width. Is the width according of the width that we want to increment it by, and that width has a background color. Where is it? This is the background color for that width, which is like a sort of purple color. All right, and we are going to increment that gauge width with this gauge unit that we have here. So if I pass in 0 here, 0 times gauge unit, we get a 0. So the gauge is not going to be incremented, and then because we have 0, we are going to increment it by 1, and then we get 1. And then 1 is going to be passed here. This condition is going to be evaluated to true because question time is 10. Keep that in mind. Then we are going to pass in 1 here and 1 here. When we pass in 1 inside the counter.inner.html on the page, we are going to see 1. And when we pass in 1 into the time gauge.style.width, 1 times gauge unit is 80. It's right here. So 1 times 80, we are going to get 80. 80 plus pixels, we are going to get 80 pixels. So the width of the time gauge, which is right here, is going to be what? You can see that I have given it a height, but there is no width because the width is going to be added dynamically, and the width is 80, and then the width is 80, and this background color is going to be applied. And then we go into another iteration, another iteration. Then because we increment 1 by 1, we are going to get 2. And this condition is going to run as long as this condition is not true anymore. So in the final iteration, we are going to get 10. When we increment 10, for example, when we get 10, 10 is going to be true. We are going to get 10 on the page through this code, and the final segment is going to have its background color of purple. And then when we increment 10 by 1, it is going to be 11. 11 is not going to be true, so this if statement is not going to run, and then the else is going to run, and the else says that I'm going to grab the count and I'm going to make it 0. Voila, that's it. Very, very simple, right? So at the end, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab our timer. Come on, buddy. And we are going to set an interval, and this is a very useful function in JavaScript. So first off, what is it that we want to set the interval on? It is the renderCounter that we want to set the interval. And what is the interval time that we want this function to run? So I want this function to run after each 1 second. So I'm going to add in 1000 milliseconds. So timer handler. So first one is going to be handler, and then the timeout. The timeout is going to be 1000 milliseconds or 1 second. So now if I come here, we can see that this counter is going to be incremented by 1 second. Or 1000 milliseconds. And when it reaches to 10, it is not going to go to 11. The reason for that is 11 is not true here. 11 is not true here. That's why this if statement, is if block is not going to run. The else block runs, and the else block is going to grab the count, and it is going to make it 0. So, voila, the count is 0. And each time this is incremented, the gauge width, which comes from here, is going to increment it by the same number because we multiply it by the same count. So 1 times 80 pixels, 2 times 80 pixels, 4 times, 5 times 80 pixels, 6 times, 7 times, 8 times 80 pixels, 10 times 80 pixels, we are going to get 800 pixels. That's how simple it is. That's it. Well, not that's it. I'm just going to add another, because this code is very ugly sitting right here. Why don't we add it to the start quiz function? This is where everything comes together. So we are going to create, I promise you, this is going to be the final function. So we are going to create a start quiz function. And what is it? What is the start quiz function? The start quiz function is the event that is going to run whenever we click on the start. All right. So this is very, very, very cool stuff. So start quiz. And what do we want to do in here? Basically, we just want to grab everything and put it right here. And now this function should be called somewhere to run. All right. So what I'm going to do, I promise this is the last thing. I'm going to grab and I'm going to say start. What is that? Weird. Start button event listener. I always write it the way it is. Whenever I want to write something, I just spell it I just pronounce it the way it is written. So it says listener, but it actually written listener. That's how, if English is your second language, you're not going to make any mistake. But just make sure to keep it to yourself. Like, don't say it out loud, or other people are going to look at you very weird. All right, so let's say start quiz. So everything should work perfectly fine. So this is our application. So whenever I click on this start quiz, we're going to start our quiz. The counter is starting, but the questions, they're not going to switch. So we are going to wait for it until it hits 10. Boom, it starts from 0 once more. All right, so we are getting close. So now the interface is starting to work. That's it for this lecture. See you guys in the next one.